Leafs trade talks are escalating as multiple reports have dropped from notable reporters, including Elliot Friedman, revealing the Toronto Maple Leafs trade plans and also revealing a key target that they are pursuing. We're going to break that down and discuss what it means going forward as the Toronto Maple Leafs are approaching a very critical trade deadline. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, but before you get into it, quick reminder, hit that subscribe button. If you're part of the 71.6% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content, and we're on the road to 15,000 subscribers. So if you want to help us towards that goal, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Darius, a ton of news is going down. The Leafs coming off a huge win yesterday against the Sabres. They do play later tonight against the New York Islanders. We will have a stream for that, so make sure you tune in. But a lot of things going on right now, and trade reports are, escalating. There's rumors flying. Elliot Friedman's getting involved. We have a ton of things to go over here and some interesting targets. Let's just dive into some of the reports that have been going down. So the first one came from James Myrtle, very notable, very reputable insider. He said the Leafs have reportedly been, quote, looking aggressively for the center they want, end quote, ahead of the NHL trade deadline. So we're going to start with this. We have a bunch of other things to go over, including a couple targets here, but it seems like Brad Treliving is actively going out and trying to acquire what we think is going to be a third line center at this trade deadline. And as the trade deadline approaches, could happen before, of course. But given the way that this third line has been producing, it's going to be interesting to see how this all fits into the equation here.
Yeah, and there's been conflicting reports as well because they're looking for a center, as James Myrtle says here, which is true. I believe that they're looking for a center, but the real question isn't what's been thrown around by different reporters and insiders is, are they looking for a second line center or are they looking for a third line center? Because there's also been some reports saying that they wouldn't mind moving Tavares to the wing and getting a second line center. Now, I believe with the current makeup of the roster, and I'm just going to throw two names out there, and there's a couple names that have been circling. I think the best course of action is to go with somebody who's more cost effective and can play third line center. We'll get into it later in the video on how the money might work. But I think two options that could be very useful for the Leafs is Nick Bjugstad from the Utah Hockey Club and Scott Laughton from the Philadelphia Flyers. I think those are two guys you can win with, and they're really good options for the Leafs. And again, those names have been kicked around a lot. Friedman is reporting some things as well, which we'll get into, but there's a lot of conflicting reports right now, and it seems like the Leafs are really considering their options. Do we want a second line center to move Tavares to the wing, or is Tavares playing well enough, which I believe he is, to continue playing second line center? Let's go get a third line center. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and obviously you've seen Berube change up the top line. They're changing up every single line. Obviously Matthew Knies being moved to the second line. The third line, which had a phenomenal game again yesterday, headlining Nick Robertson, Max Domi playing center, which a lot of fans, we saw some people in our stream yesterday kind of debating whether or not Max Domi can be a playoff third line center on a very good team. We're seeing articles and rumors circulating surrounding Scott Laughton. Could it be the Maple Leafs' next trade acquisition? Shout out to Mark Friedman for that article. And you can see this here. Scott Laughton would be the perfect fit for the Maple Leafs, given the team's style under Craig Berube. The Oakland, Ontario native is making $3 million this season and next. He could fetch a reasonable return if traded. And I'm curious, and we bring this up again. This is not a report. This is more of a rumor about Scott Laughton, and it kind of floats well into what the actual reporters are saying. I think it would fit very interestingly, and as a name it will be to watch. And as we approach the deadline, 32 games this season, he has 7 goals and 8 assists for 15 points, which is perfect for what the Leafs really need here. And as you start to think about what the return could be before we get another report, Nick Robertson's been the name we've been throwing all over the place. But with how well he's been playing lately, that now makes the conversation a bit more difficult surrounding what the actual assets the Leafs would be giving up is. Do they get rid of some of their depth in the Marlies? Do they give up some picks? That's still up in the air. But the question now is, what is the return going to be for whatever the center is that Brad Treliving is actively pursuing and aggressively pursuing? Is Nick Robertson still headlining this deal? I'm not entirely sure that 3 or 4 games is going to change Brad Treliving's mindset on this, but if they wait until the trade deadline, we'll have a much clearer view of what Nick Robertson's value is and how he's going to be factoring into this third line. Because if this third line continues the way that it's going, I don't know that they would want to change that up.
They're buzzing right now. That is for sure. That's something that you have to consider in all these trade talks and when they're looking for centers, right? I can't really envision Max Domi playing center come playoff time, right? And when you look at Nick Robertson too, I've defended him all year. I still think there's a very high ceiling there, and he's finally figuring it out. These last couple games, he's played very well, right? But business is business. If you want to make your team better and you want to make your team, a harder team to play against in the playoffs, you got to consider these things. Maybe Nick Robertson could be considered in this trade because I think the Philadelphia Flyers are going to get a very good return for Scott Laughton because a lot of teams could use a player like this playing third line center for them. So especially the Leafs, this is a guy I think you can win with, right? He knows how to play the right way. And I think, having him on a team with Craig Berube and just the style they've been playing, I think it lends very well to his type of game over there with the Flyers. And he's coming from a team coached by John Tortorella as well. So I think he'd fit in perfectly with the Leafs right now. But it's a very interesting option. And then if you were to do that, maybe Nick Robertson moves out. I'm not saying it's a 1-for-1 or anything like that, but maybe you get another piece back because I still think the Leafs want a couple pieces here before the end of the year around the trade deadline. It kind of solidifies your lineup a little bit more. Domi can maybe move to the wing then. There's a couple things that you can move around, right? So I think it's very interesting. And I think the correct course of action right now, yes, the third line is buzzing at times. We've seen the second line, really turned it on this year. I think the correct course of action is leave Tavares second line center. He's played really well this year. He's still filling that role, I believe. Third line center could use some work and could really solidify that lineup, especially down the middle.
Yeah, and we can dive into some other reports that have come out, like you mentioned, the contradicting reports, conflicting reports. This is from, of course, David Pinato, I believe. The Maple Leafs are in the market for a second-line center, but are keeping their cap space in mind. They may not go after the top names, but are exploring affordable options. If they can find the right 2C, they'll likely stick with John Tavares as center and add a left winger who can score, play physical, and be defensively responsible alongside Tavares and William Nylander, even though we've seen now they switched up William Nylander into that top line. We saw yesterday in the second half of the game, they put Nylander, or they separated that top line again, kind of moving Nylander back down. So things have been very fluid in every game. That's kind of the way that Craig Berube has been this entire season. We've seen him, juggle the lines. He's not afraid to make changes, which is something that we can both appreciate. Obviously, Sheldon Keefe was kind of like that as well. He was a lot more hesitant with moving things around. But Craig Berube doesn't care at all. He doesn't in the slightest. But regarding Scott Laughton here, before we move on to Elliot Friedman's report, $3 million cap hit. He's a UFA after 2026. You have a couple of years of control as well in year 4 of 5. So if you bought him, if you traded for him, his contract wouldn't end. You wouldn't have to make a huge contract after this. You have not another year, of course, after. He wouldn't be a rental, which Brad Treliving, I would say he hates rentals, but he did kind of just trade for a bunch of rentals last trade deadline, albeit they were, 4th rounders, 6th rounders going out. So it's interesting. Let us know what your thoughts are on him. A very interesting name we haven't really spoken about too much. He is, of course, something to note, the assistant captain of the team he's on. So it's interesting. I don't know if he necessarily the Philadelphia Flyers would want to trade him, just given that, along with a couple other things. But ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. And Friedman echoed what we've been saying here now, pointing out the team's interest in moving John Tavares to the wing could be another reason they are prioritizing a center. And this is on, of course, the 32 Thoughts podcast. And he said Toronto continues fleshing out centers. He's very good at taking draws. Moving him to the left side during play adds much needed offense to that side. So it kind of adds some more interesting details into Scott Laughton, into whoever else you want to put into this specific spot. Obviously, we're using this for sake of argument. You mentioned Nick Bjugstad. He's a really good fit, arguably, to me, a better fit than Scott Laughton. But any thoughts on this before we wrap up here? Friedman echoing the same thing. That's 3 different reporters now.
Yeah, and I think Scott Laughton's been kicked around a lot, this name, right? Like Paul Bissonnette is on this as well. This would be a great fit. And I think not just because of his play on the ice, but like you mentioned, you brought up the contract. He has another year. You have another year of control on this player. This is not a rental. You can keep him and then maybe flip him if you want, or you can keep him and he can be a really good asset for this team, right? And a good glue piece for the third line. So I think that it's definitely an option that they should look at. Nick Bjugstad as well. These low cost, effective options for maybe your third line, I think is the way to go, because there's still a lot of, you're very top heavy with the salary right now. So, and it's fine. John Tavares is playing very well so far this season. The foot speed to me has always been an issue and a question mark with John Tavares. So if that's the reason why they want to go out and get a second line center, I think he does a lot of other things that, a lot of players don't do second line center wise. So I think he's been pretty good. And again, it's an option that they should look at. And I think there may be going to make one move or two. But again, Brad Treliving doesn't like to trade for rentals necessarily, and he doesn't like to build his team at the trade deadline. I feel like this is pretty much what we're going to see heading into the playoffs, minus a piece or two like Scott Laughton.
Yeah, let us know down below what your thoughts are on that. And also, let us know what target you think the Leafs are going to be pursuing, because again, they are aggressively pursuing a center, and we kind of knew that going in. The big question now is who that will be, and we'll keep you up to date with all the latest news as reports continue to fly. I wouldn't be surprised if Bjugstad or Laughton are the ones. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later.